Okay, sounds like mostly everyone has joined. I don't hear the notification anymore, so we can go ahead and get started. So hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the July 2020 release, CVAC Town Hall. My name is Brianna Lee, and I'm going to be presenting today. I wanted to introduce the different presenters that we have on. We have our subject matter experts, Nicholas, who's the SEO Fiscal Sprint Team subject matter expert. We also have Jaren, who is also SEO Fiscal Sprint Team subject matter expert. And then there's me, Brianna Lee, and also Julia, and we help with the fiscal change management for SEO and SEO releases. So today we're going to be using a tool called Mentimeter to help with our questions and answers. So any questions that you have during this presentation, feel free to send them in to Menti. And how you can get there is you can use your phone to log on. You can also use your computer as well. So what you will do is you will go to www.menti.com, and then you'll enter in the code that we have for today, which is 94, 55, and 18. And once you go in there, you should be able to see a screen, and it'll show you different questions and also have an option where you can ask questions and send them in. So we'll be going through the questions that you send in throughout the presentation, answering them. So the first question that we have for our Menti question is, if you could only keep one household appliance, what would you choose? I think this one was a hard one because I realized there were so many different appliances that I use in the kitchen, but I think microwave is pretty versatile. Julia, which appliance would you choose?
When I was thinking about this earlier, I was going to say air fryer, but now looking at these, I feel like it's more practical to say microwave or, yeah, probably a microwave.
Yeah. Yeah, microwave is definitely convenient.
Or a fridge, or else you have to store things like underground.
It's kind of hard to choose. You either have hot food, but it can't keep for very long, or you have cold food, but you can't heat it up.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you everybody for answering. And again, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, you can send them in, and then they'll show up here on the screen.
Hi.
So now we'll get started with the actual presentation. Thank you everybody for attending. You are attending this presentation because your department has been identified to be part of the CVAC functionality pilot that will be set to control.
Okay.
And so these are the departments that have been identified, the BU numbers. And we wanted to let you know that when the CVAC functionality, control functionality is turned on for your departments, your department will have a priority line to SEO experts when contacting FSC for any CVAC issues that you may encounter after the go live. And we also wanted to make the distinction between what is track with and control. So if your BU has a shared fund, those funds will be set to track with and not control. What track with is when Fiscal tracks that there's enough fund cash and appropriation authority to complete the transaction. Your department end user may see CVAC budget check related warnings if Fiscal identifies that there's not enough fund cash or appropriation authority, but your transaction activity will not be prevented. So this is track with, and versus control. Control is if there's not enough available fund cash or appropriation authority for a transaction, the CVC-VAC budget check will create an exception. And then after that exception is created, Fiscal is going to prevent your department end user from completing a transaction where the budget check exception occurs. So the difference with track with is your department will see CVC-VAC budget check related warnings if there's not enough fund cash or appropriation authority, but your transaction activity isn't going to be prevented, versus in control, if you do not have enough fund cash or appropriation authority, Fiscal will prevent you from completing your transaction activity. And today we'll be covering the CVC-VAC functionality in 3 parts. First, we're going to be giving an overview of what the functionality is. Secondly, we'll talk about the different events where the CVC-VAC budget check occurs. And then third, we'll talk about available queries to help with exception handling. So CVC-VAC is coming as part of the July 2020 release. When transacting in Fiscal, your fund cash validation and cash validation appropriation control, the CVC-VAC functionality will automatically validate that there's enough fund cash and appropriation authority to complete the transaction. So the validation that happens today in SEO Legacy is going to happen upfront in Fiscal. And the difference between cash validation and what cash validation appropriation control is cash validation validates the cash for a fund at the time of payment, deposit, or during the cash reclassification process. Cash validation appropriation control is validating the authority at the time of appropriation level during payment, deposit, or cash reclassification process. So Fiscal department should be familiar with SEO's existing validation process that happens today. The process goes as follows. First, the department uses Fiscal to process payments and transfers, which then interface to SEO Legacy. SEO Legacy then checks and validates if there's enough fund cash and appropriation authority to cover the payment or transaction in SEO Legacy. And then if SEO determines that there's not enough fund cash and or appropriation authority to cover the payment or transaction, they void the transaction and notify the Department of the Non-Sufficient Funds, NSF. And starting in July 2020, the CVC-VAC budget check raises exceptions in Fiscal. The CVC-VAC budget checks are powered using a new KK ledger that is similar to existing ledgers. CVC-VAC exceptions will occur if insufficient funds, fund cash or appropriation authority is present, or if there are no budgets, even for $0, that exist in Fiscal for CVC-VAC ledgers. CVC-VAC will budget check all transactions that have cash impact, regardless if they are expenditures, transfers, revenue, or reimbursement transactions. So what the CVC-VAC functionality is going to do is it's going to prevent users from transacting if there's not enough available fund cash and appropriation authority. And if we look at this picture here, what it's telling us is that if budget check, cash validation, and cash validation appropriation, if one of them doesn't pass, then an exception will occur, and the transactions with exceptions will not interface to SEO Legacy until corrected. Today in this presentation, we're going to be covering CVC-VAC exception cases. So the cases when the CVC-VAC budget check raises exceptions. If your transaction passes the CVC-VAC budget check, there's going to be no change and no additional action is needed. What we're focusing on in this presentation today is on the cases when the CVC-VAC budget check fails either cash validation or cash validation appropriation control, and the different changes that your departments should be aware of when these exceptions are raised. Unposting a transaction will only be allowed if there is a CVC-VAC exception. After the CVC-VAC functionality is implemented, Fiscal will no longer allow transactions that have passed the CVC-VAC budget check and have posted to GL to be unposted. If a CVC-VAC exception has occurred, a department can contact the FSC to unpost or reverse the transaction. But transactions that have been unposted or reversed will be considered canceled. And then lastly, for cases when there's a CVC-VAC exception, a new transaction is required to correct it. So now we're going to go into talking about the different events that the CVC-VAC budget check verifies during. So it verifies during the 5 events: pay cycle, cash reclass, cash clearing, AR update, and budget check. And we'll be going into each of these in more detail. And we wanted to make a distinction for when CVC-VAC budget check runs between pay cycle and all other events. So when the CVC-VAC budget check runs, if an exception occurs in pay cycle, for cash validation, all the payments using the exception fund will go into exception. And for cash validation appropriation control, all the payments using the exception appropriation will go into exception. Versus all other events, which are individual transactions, for both cash validation and cash validation appropriation control, the individual transaction will go into exception because these transactions are CVC-VAC budget checked on the individual level. So the CVC-VAC functionality has cross-module impacts, and we've broken them up into different modules. You can identify your staff who are impacted by their fiscal roles. So we've broken them up into modules here, and then we've identified the fiscal and user roles that are impacted according to each module. So for the AP module, the AP approver and AP payment processor is impacted. For AR, the AR payment processor and the BI AR payment processor is impacted. For GL, the GL processor and GL approver is impacted. For LD, the LD processor, and for PC, the PC job processor. And now we'll take a pause to answer another Menti question and also look at any questions that you guys might have submitted to the Menti. Okay, looks like we have 2 questions. Julia, would you like to read them?
Yeah, so our first question is, when will our departments be set to control?
Hi, everybody. This is Nick. Right now, the date that the departments are set to control is July 15th.
So July 15th will be the date. Thank you, Nick.
And then our second question, if I haven't collected my reimbursement, will my payments pass CVC-VAC?
So this depends if it's a shared fund or not. If it's a shared fund, it'll still pass, but it might still fail on legacy. If it's a non-shared fund, then it will fail since we will have it configured as control.
Okay, thank you.
All right, the next question. For cash clearing, is it about the general cash and unapplied receipts?
I think we're going to go into cash clearing in a little more detail on a further slide, but I think like you'll see there, we're just talking about the CTS funds, and we will be setting CTS funds to track with, but we'll go through that on another slide, I think, Bree.
Yeah. Okay, that looks like all the questions that we have so far. If you guys have any more, please continue to send them in. We'll be taking pauses throughout the presentation to answer them. Okay, now we'll go back to the presentation. So the first event that we're going to be talking about where CVAC occurs is the pay cycle event. CVAC budget check occurs for vouchers during the AP pay cycle and follows these general steps. Fiscal end user will create and cancel a payment or create a manual payment. Examples would be an inbound claim payment, a warrant voucher, a department check. And then at this time, as Nick mentioned, CTS funds will be set to track with. After the fiscal end user creates or cancels the payment, the fiscal processes the voucher and posts it. Fiscal then runs the CVAC budget check during the pay cycle selection phase. And the CVAC budget check happens for all vouchers, as we mentioned before, across all funds and appropriations. And then if there are any exceptions, Fiscal then identifies them. So if exceptions are identified and if your voucher does fail CVAC budget check, SEO is going to reset your workflow. The steps go as SEO will reset the workflow and unpost the voucher. A workflow reset notification is sent as it is today, so you'll receive that. And then departments can make changes to the voucher as needed and resubmit for approvals when CVAC is available. And if your department does not take any action, then the payment will not occur. So next, we're going to be talking about the second event, which is cash reclassification. So first of all, we wanted to define what is cash reclassification. Fiscal uses cash reclassification to reclassify eligible departmental transactions into the statewide BU. And a note is Fiscal transactions are designated differently if they cross fund or BU as follows in this table here. During cash reclassification, the CVAC budget check occurs during the following transactions. And we've broken them down by module and specific transactions that occur during each of these modules. We'll be going over them in detail in the next slides. This is a summary table that you can refer to. So the general process that the CVAC budget check will occur for transactions during the cash reclassification process goes as follows. First, the fiscal end user will create the transaction. Secondly, the transaction will then go through the necessary approvals, such as fiscal and SEO approvals. It will then post to the subsystem ledger. Fiscal will then run the CVAC budget checks during cash reclassification. And then the fiscal end user will take action for any exceptions that have been identified and that have occurred. A non-PFA cash reclass CVAC exception, so these ones in the table below, will impact fiscal in the following ways. So if we separated by module and by transactions during each module, and also with common examples. So we'll go through each one. So in the AP module, transactions include the journal that CVAC is checked on, include the journal voucher and ORF reimbursement. Common examples of these transactions include to correct a voucher and ORF replenishments. If the CVAC budget check fails on these transactions, Fiscal does not post the journal voucher or subsystem entries to GL, and the journal voucher and ORF will not interface to SEO legacy. The next module is AR, and the transaction is customer item payment received in CTS bank accounts. Common example is typical AR payments to an AR item. And if the CVAC budget check fails on transaction, then it will not interface to SEO legacy. Next, in the GL module, we have GL journals. Common examples are allocations and intra-unit entries. We also have GL 108. And if CVAC budget check fails for GL journals, then that GL journal will not interface to SEO legacy. For GL 108, all exceptions will be overridden by SEO since the transaction has already been posted in SEO legacy. And then moving on to the LD and PC module for non-PFA. The transaction for LD is labor distribution intra with different fund and PC funds distribution. And also labor distribution non-intra for the same fund. So if CVAC budget check fails for those transactions, for labor distribution intra and PC funds distribution, the transactions are posted in subsystem, but they do not complete cash reclass successfully until they pass the CVAC budget check in cash reclass. For labor distribution non-intra, the transaction does not post in GL until it passes CVAC budget check. So the action that your department should take if they identify an exception on your CVAC reports during cash reclass in AR, AP, or GL, your department should first request FSC to reverse the journal voucher or ORF or unpost the AR, CIP, GL journals. So you should request FSC to reverse or unpost the transaction, and then your department should create a new transaction. If your department does not take any action, the CVAC budget check will reoccur for the transactions in exception during the nightly batch process to see if new fund cash or appropriation authority is available until the exceptions are cleared. And CVAC exceptions must be resolved within a week. If they're not resolved within a week, FSC will reverse or unpost transactions with the exceptions. Fiscal will notify departments before Fiscal takes action on the department's behalf. Look out for specific guidelines on the timelines of the CVAC exception resolution. And so now we're moving on to action that you can take if your department identifies an exception on your CVAC reports in LD or PC, both non-PFA. For LD non-intra-unit from the same fund, more authority has to come in for the transaction to get posted. In this case, you should contact FSC if this occurs, if you get an exception in this case. For the LD intra-unit PC funds distribution from different fund, your department has to create a new LD/PC transaction to correct the original transaction. Again, this correction must be done in a timely manner, so within a week, for your department's books to be correct. If it's not done within a week, FSC will then reverse the original transaction. And now we're going to be moving into PFA eligible transactions. So as you probably know, and as you've probably seen this slide before posting, Fiscal validates that PFA eligible transactions are in accordance with the approved PFA letter. Eligible transactions include labor distribution, allocations, and online GL journals from source PFA, CARE, or ESAD. And cash reclass runs using the PFA activity from the PFA submission ledger. So if you would like more details related to the PFA submission ledger, please refer to the PFA overview interface town hall that we had a couple of weeks ago. The general steps for cash reclass running using PFA activity is that the Fiscal end user will select appropriations, provide legal authority and reason for request, and certify to submit to SCO using the PFA review page. Fiscal then creates journals for the selected PFA appropriations into the PFA submission ledger. Fiscal runs cash reclassification on the new journals that have been created in the PFA submission ledger. And during cash reclass, Fiscal also runs the CVAC budget check. If the CVAC budget check fails, the cash reclass and cash basis entries are not created and do not interface to SCO legacy as TC36. So if your department identifies an exception on your CVAC reports, your department should first request FSC to unpost the journals from the PFA submission ledger. Fiscal's plan is that the PFA review page will have these transactions available to reselect and recertify. And reselecting and recertifying will not affect the source transaction. Similar to mentioned before, if your department does not take any action, the CVAC budget check will reoccur for the transactions during the nightly batch process to check if there's new fund cash or appropriation authority available to clear the exceptions. The CVAC exceptions must be resolved within a week. If they're not, FSC will then reverse or unpost the transactions with exceptions. Again, Fiscal will notify departments before Fiscal takes action on the department's behalf and continue to look out for specific guidelines on the timeliness of the CVAC exception resolution. So that was a lot of information. We'll take another pause here to answer the next Menti question and also take some time to answer questions that you might have sent in. So we'll give you some time to answer and to submit any questions you have in. Julia, what's your favorite kind of weather?
My favorite weather is actually foggy weather.
That makes sense since you live in SF.
Yeah.
I think I like sunny weather the best. Okay, now we'll open up the questions to see what you guys have sent in.
All right, so first question we have now is, does approver 1 and 2 need to do anything before approving a voucher?
So the approvers shouldn't need to do anything different than they already do today. Basically, what we're doing is it's the NSF process that currently happens today. We're basically going to check that before the payment actually gets created, but we're still using the kind of the same process as the NSF.
Thanks, Nick. Next question.
If an invoice is paid through a paper claim, will the invoice need to run CV/CVAC?
So if we're talking about a paper claim, then this would probably post in legacy first. So what's going to happen is that it'll interface from legacy over to Fiscal, and then it'll run through a pay cycle, and it'll still check the CVAC during that pay cycle. However, if there is an exception for these, because it's already posted in legacy, we will override and do analysis as to why there's an exception.
Thank you.
When we remit money to the non-shared fund, what is the impact to the CV ledger?
So for the non-shared fund, so these will be set to control. So this will budget check with the CV ledger, but it will impact. I'm not sure what kind of impact we're asking about, but it will impact the CV ledger balance for that non-shared fund.
So let me take a stab at this one, Nick.
Mm-hmm.
So everything is going to be budget checked. It's either going to increase if you're remitting money, depositing money, or it's going to decrease if you're taking out money and making a payment. So shared fund, non-shared fund, they're both being tracked. So this will increase that cash validation ledger with its balance.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question.
When will cash be impacted for cash reclass?
So I think on one of your slides you stated the cash reclasses ran during a nightly batch process. So if the CVAC is successfully budget checked during the cash reclass, that's when the cash impact will be.
Thank you.
If we need help with an exception, what should we do?
So if you need help with an exception, especially in the beginning, since this is a new process, I think, like you stated earlier, there'll be a direct line, and I think you can provide information for the SCO Fiscal staff, which would be myself and also Lan Dong. And we can help you if you're not sure how to handle an exception, or if you are not sure if there's any action that needs to be taken. we can provide you some direction with that.
Sounds good. So sounds like if people need help with an exception in the beginning, to reach out to Nick and Lon, and then we can provide their information. That looks like all the questions that we have for now. Can continue to move on in the presentation. So we just covered pay cycle, and we also covered the first two events. So now we're going to move on to the cash clearing event, where CVAC is checked. So CVAC budget check runs for CTS deposits and remittances during the cash clearing process. The Fiscal end user will first create a CTS deposit or a CTS remittance in Fiscal. Common examples of these include deposit slip posting and cash clearing reversal when funds are remitted. After the Fiscal end user creates the deposit or remittance, Fiscal will then run cash clearing. During this time, Fiscal also will run CVAC budget check. And a note is that a CVAC exception should not occur in cash clearing until the budget is not yet established/set up. Lastly, Fiscal will post a cash clearing entry after it has passed the CVAC budget check. If your CTS deposit or remittance fails CVAC budget check, please contact FSC. You would contact FSC to help establish the budget within a week to make sure that the deposit occurs. An SCO will override the exception for the cash clearing transaction after the budget has been established. Next, we're going to move on to the fourth event where CVAC is checked, which is the AR update event. The CVAC budget check runs for customer item payments, CIP, during the AR update process. The Fiscal end user will first create a customer item payment, a CIP, that's received in the warrant bank account in Fiscal. A common example of this would be the payroll AR. The Fiscal end user then approves the CIP, and then if needed, the SCO approver also approves. Fiscal will then run the AR update process to post the CIP in AR. During the AR update process, Fiscal also runs the CVAC budget check for these transactions, since CIPs in the warrant bank account impact cash right away and do not go through cash reclassification. Then if the CVAC budget check fails, CIP payment entries do not post to GL or interface to SCO legacy. So the action that your department can take if an exception is identified on your CVAC reports during the AR update process, it's similar to the action that we shared for before in cash reclassification. Your department should first request FSC to unpost the transaction, and then your department should create a new transaction. And if your department does not take any action, again, CVAC budget check will reoccur for the transactions exception during the nightly batch process to see if there's new fund cash or appropriation authority available to clear the exceptions. The CVAC exceptions must be resolved within a week, and FSC, again, will reverse or unpost transactions with exceptions that have not been cleared within a week. Fiscal will notify departments before Fiscal takes action on the department's behalf. Continue to look out for specific guidelines on the timeliness of the exception resolution. So now we're going to move on to our other mentee question, which is, what is your favorite kind? Next one was, what is a must-see movie? I know that now that we've been in quarantine and in lockdown, definitely have had a lot more time at home. And if you guys have been watching any good shows or movies, feel free to send in any recommendations. Julia, do you have a movie that is a must-see for you that you would recommend?
I'd have to think about this. I'm actually not sure.
What kind of genre of movies do you like to watch?
I like all of them. I've definitely watched more documentaries recently, but before I thought that they were a little boring. But definitely getting more interested in them now.
Yeah, they're pretty educational. I think for myself, a must-see movie would be La La Land. I really liked how they were able to film that in LA and combine it with musical elements. So it was just a very happy movie.
I actually haven't watched that, but I've heard so much about it.
Yeah, I recommend. I think it's hit and miss between people, but if you're like a hopeless romantic, you'll like it. Okay, we'll answer the questions that you guys have sent in.
Would there
Okay.
be a way of getting a copy of the presentation?
Yeah, so around 1 o'clock, I actually sent out an email with the presentation attached. So I responded to the meeting invite with a local copy of the presentation. So check that. We're also working on getting this presentation approved and posted on ServiceNow. So it should also be made available within the coming days. And if you need to, if you don't have a copy, feel free to reach out to me and I can send you one as well. That looks like all the questions that we have. Back to the presentation. Okay, so now we're moving on to the last event that CVAC budget check will occur, which is in the budget check event. So the CVAC budget check runs for DJPs, direct journal payments, and online GL journals concurrently with the standard budget check. The steps are that the fiscal end user will schedule the direct journal payment transactions or the non-intra-unit same fund GL journal in fiscal. Fiscal will then run the standard budget check process. And then during this process, they'll also run the CVAC budget check. Fiscal will then identify CVAC exceptions prior to transactions or the journal's posting. And then the fiscal end user will update the DJP or GL journal as necessary before running the budget check. CVAC budget check runs for the non-intra-unit GL journals, GL 108 during budget check as well. Fiscal will create the non-intra-unit, the same fund GL journals in Fiscal for journals already posted in SCO Legacy, GL 108. Common example of this would be entries that cross appropriations within the same fund. Fiscal will then run the standard budget check process. And again, during this is when CVAC budget check is run as well. If the CVAC budget check fails, the exception will be overwritten by SCO since the transaction has already been posted in SCO Legacy. So there's no change to the process to correcting accounting in SCO Legacy. So you'd follow the same process, which is creating a new GL journal. And now we'll be moving into the third part of our presentation, which is talking about the queries that are available to help your departments with identifying CVAC exceptions. So when you go live, there will be queries that are available to show a list of transactions that have CVAC exceptions. The queries will be able to be found on the query viewer page by transaction type. And currently they're making updates to the queries that will be made post July 2020 to improve the identification of CVAC exceptions. Fiscal's goal is to include the CVAC queries in the Department Exception Work Center page that is currently in development. And in addition to this, we're also going to be publishing a CVAC job aid. And once that job aid is published, it will also include a list of all of the available queries. And we will let you know when this job aid is released. To reiterate, it's the responsibility of departments to manage CVCVAC exceptions within a week. Departments must identify exceptions using queries, identify the reason that exception was created. Exceptions only occur if Fiscal identifies that there is not enough fund cash or appropriation authority to complete the transaction. And departments must also update or create new transactions depending on the event and process. So you can refer to the CVCVAC action cheat sheet, which we will go over in the next coming slides. Fiscal and SEO also understand that this is a new process, and they want to support departments in their understanding of why CVCVAC exceptions are raised. So if you have any questions at any time, please contact FSC if you need assistance. As I mentioned on the previous page about this cheat sheet, we've put together this table which summarizes all of the different actions that your department can take if a CVCVAC budget check fails. So we've separated them into the different events that we just covered. So the events that the CVCVAC budget check occurs. And then we've listed out the processes and the action that your department should take if an exception is raised. So all that we went over in the presentation is consolidated and summarized into this page here. So this is a good page that you should have on reference. And we've just went through a lot of information about the functionality, but we wanted to also spend some time talking about the benefits to the CVCVAC functionality. Overall, the CVCVAC functionality will reduce error and SEO legacy and give departments better understanding of their available fund cash and appropriation authority. Departments no longer need to wait to be notified of the non-sufficient funds, NSF by SEO. You can begin exception resolution on your own by referring to the available reports and queries. Again, the validation that happens in SEO legacy today is going to happen upfront in Fiscal. Another benefit is that it reduces the number of void transactions in SEO legacy and limits unnecessary voiding and cleanup. And you also will have a better understanding of your current cash basis appropriation and fund level cash flow. And having this better understanding will give you more information for better decision making and processing your transactions.
Avery, can I add one thing on that?
Yeah.
I just want to point out that while we are doing the CVCVAC check in Fiscal, the SEO legacy is still the book of record. So the current NSF process will still be happening. So we do recommend to check both SEO legacy and Fiscal because while we're doing our analysis and we expect that if it passed CVCVAC that we won't have NSF, we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So we recommend that practice to check both before you submit a payment or a transaction.
Thanks, Nick. And now we'll be going back to Menti to answer any questions that might be there. And also provide you the opportunity to give feedback to us. So we wanted to ask you guys to rate how we're doing, and the results for this are hidden, so feel free to just send in whatever feedback you have anonymously. And then while you're providing feedback, we'll go through the questions that we have.
All right, so why aren't all transactions checked at budget check?
So for all transactions, we typically check whenever the transaction becomes a cash basis transaction, whenever it is impacting the cash, or like whenever it is eligible cash basis transaction. So that's why we see majority of the CVCVAC budget checking happening during the cash rate clause or during the pay cycle. During the normal budget checking, like or the regular budget checking that we have, as we have seen, it is for the transactions that that are cash basis transaction are not eligible for cash rate clause. So we don't have any other place to do the budget checking. So that's why we do the budget checking right there, because it's an eligible cash transaction, like a non-intra transaction, non-intra fund transactions, basically crossing appropriations within the same fund. Those are eligible cash transactions, but that doesn't go to cash regulars. We don't have the entire CVC VAC at the normal budget checking, just because that is, the normal budget checking happens is at an accrual basis of accounting. So, the point of CVC VAC is being, doing the budget checking when it becomes a cash basis transaction.
Thank you, Sharon.
I just want to add something to this question. Brianna, can you go back, please?
Oh. Sorry, I think it was cleared. But Carmen, you can continue to answer.
Yes, I just want to say that, the normal budget check is like sometimes it's go by your, if it's a budget act item, it's go by your authority. But what we're doing CVC VAC is making sure that you have cash to cover the activity. Say, for example, if your appropriation has a reimbursement attached to this. So let's say if your budget is like for the D account, like you have $1,000, but out of the 1,000, like 500 is the reimbursement. So, the CVC VAC will make sure that you collect the $500 cash before that we can pass a transaction. Let's say if you're going to process a transaction for $600. So if you didn't collect that reimbursement, of course, you're going to fail. So, but for the regular budget check, you may pass because if it's over 50% of this, we'll set it as a budget instead of collected. So you may pass for the regular budget check, but you are not going to pass for the CVC VAC because apparently you don't have enough cash to cover that. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Carmen.
All right, next question. Will we be able to make recommendations about functionality changes, for example, queries/reporting?
We'll take every recommendation. They're all valuable to us. So if you have any recommendations, feel free to send them to us, and we'll take them into consideration.
Thank you.
Will the job aid be available before we are set to control?
Bree and Corey, is this for you guys?
Yeah. So I do believe that we're in the process of getting the job aid posted. So we will get it out to you guys because we're going to include the queries before the functionality goes live.
Will the cheat sheet be available in the job aid?
We can definitely make sure that it's included. That looks like all of the questions that we have for now. We have one more feedback question for Menti, which is just open feedback. What did we do well during this town hall? What could we improve on for the next town hall? And as you guys are providing feedback for that, we'll go over the remaining part of the presentation. So as we were mentioning, as people were asking in the questions, these are the additional resources that we have planned. They're coming soon as we're currently finalizing them. The CVC VAC infographic should be distributed to departments soon, and it will provide a high-level overview of the functionality. The job aid will be Fiscal 461 for CVC VAC, and that is also coming soon. And we'll make sure that we include the list of the queries, and we'll include the cheat sheet as well in this job aid. And then as we heard a lot of feedback in the past town halls that we've had lately, departments wanted to get a transcription of the Q&A process to be able to reference again. So we're going to work on transcribing the questions and answers that we had during this town hall and getting a copy out to you guys as a resource. And then lastly, another piece of support is that we're going to be holding SEO User Support Labs, USL, starting in July. As we've probably mentioned before, these USLs are available to support you guys and support your departments as you begin transacting with the new functionality and processes. The USLs give you the opportunity to perform your work in FISCAL, where there will also be SEO subject matter experts available to support you and answer any questions that you have about the functionality. If you would like to sign up, please refer to the task BUSN 975 to identify participants to attend the July release support lab sessions. We've been getting a lot of responses from departments who have already signed up for this, so thank you for those who have already submitted. And we look forward to holding these sessions soon. And that is it for all the content that we have prepared for the presentation today. Seems like we still have a good amount of time left. If you guys want to stay on, we'll continue to answer questions through Menti. So feel free to send in any questions that you have. We'll just be using the rest of this time for Q&A.
So hey everyone, so for this call, since we're using Teams, we can also open up the audio if you guys want to just take yourself off mute and ask any questions. If not, we can kind of close it up a little early and give you guys some time back.
Doesn't look like we're getting in any more questions. If you guys have any more questions, you can always feel free to send an email to us. Also to send an email to Fiscal CMO, and we'll route it to the appropriate people to answer it. So if we're not going to have any more questions, I think we can end the town hall for today. Thank you everybody for attending, and have a good rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.